Hey everyone, happy Monday evening. It's January 12th. Looking ahead to this week's weather outlook. First, wanted to start with conditions going back towards last Friday evening. I mainly wanted to highlight that we did see this storm system late last week bring some snow to parts of Colorado, Kansas, moving up into the plains, Midwest, and Northeast. I'm also bringing some severe storms to parts of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and into the Southeast as well as we went into Saturday there. And as that lifted up, brought snow, some lake effect snow yesterday, active atmospheric river sequence. Across parts of the Pacific Northwest, that's kind of now winding down. And as we look sort of at where we're at right now, we get a slightly different view here. I was showing surface pressure, and this was a past forecast, surface pressure, precipitation, and our heights to denote where precipitation types tend to change. But if we look at the mid-levels of the atmosphere, 500 millibars, and we look at not only the heights of that, the higher they are generally, where we see areas of high pressure, where the atmosphere is generally warmer, when we look at the color coding that says just how anomalous it is. So whether the heights or areas of high pressure are higher than average or lower than average based on the color coding there. And if we look at where we are at right now and both going into the 13th, a couple things stand out. So we have this ridge that's been developing and has really been sort of the story for most of the winter so far across the West Coast. And as we step to the next few days, I'll kind of go into the forecast more in a bit here. But what's really going to set up is an amplification of this trough for the Western U.S. It's going to bring above average conditions. Large-scale trough kind of develops across much of the eastern U.S., so generally below average temperatures across the eastern U.S. with periods of snow, and in the middle, a little more moderate. We'll see some fire weather concerns from the high plains down into the southern plains through the next few days. And one of the things that's been asked is, and I've been wondering myself, is, we've had this very prominent ridging and area of high pressure across the West Coast for most of this winter. We've had periods, of course, where troughing has come in, and we've seen pretty extreme atmospheric river events across parts of the Northwest into California. It's always difficult to sort of say exactly, what one trigger is for this. The atmosphere is a complex system with a lot of different interactions and systems working together. One of the hypotheses is with this really warm area of water across much of the northern Pacific with temperatures, a few plus degrees above average. That's been pretty persistent. We see a lot of the Pacific above average. You can see the reflection this week, La Nina, with slightly below average temperatures across the equatorial Pacific. And another thing I wanted to point out was we also have noticeably above average temperatures across sort of the eastern Pacific of the coast of Mexico. And the only reason I bring this up is I was looking at the integrated vapor transport. This is sort of the advection of moisture, helps define how we can look at atmospheric rivers in one way. And we can see that it's been really, enhanced across parts of the Pacific Northwest and parts of British Columbia and into Alaska, where we've seen some did mention it's incredible snowfall over Juneau, Alaska over the last couple of weeks with this really amplified pattern. Again, we've had, the kind of typical Aleutian low active series of storm cycles into the off the Aleutians here, and then this ridge has really created this amplified pattern, and that's really been directed into British Columbia and far south parts of Alaska. But as we step this forward, you'll notice that it all of a sudden goes from kind of west-east oriented to much more south and north, and that sort of as this pattern amplifies. This ridge amplifies on the west coast as the trough amplifies on the east coast, and that's really going to direct a lot of the moisture and sort of storm system cycles further north, more into Alaska as we get later into this week. One of the things I wanted to call out that stood out to me, I mentioned those warmer temperature anomalies across the eastern Pacific off of the coast of Mexico. Both, you'll notice as this feature here, and I've looked at several different levels, and this is just sort of the moisture profile of it, looking at both the GFS and the European, the ECMWF models, they show us some kind of like weak tropical disturbance. Don't know what the intensity of this will be, or if this will even come to fruition, but there is some evidence of some weak tropical system developing across the eastern Pacific. So pretty uncommon to happen this time of year. It's not that it hasn't happened before to my recollection, but will be something interesting to watch this weekend into early next week. Now, also wanted to tie into the fact that this ridging has created kind of this really dry, below average snowfall for much of the western U.S., especially kind of central portions of the West Coast down into much of the Southwest. The exception has been after a few pretty high-end storm cycles, some above average areas or near to above average across parts of the Sierra Nevadas. As you get further north into Colorado and Utah, conditions are getting a little bit better, closer to average. This is percent of median of the snow water equivalent one of the ways we look at snowpack. And then it gets better as you go up into Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana, and parts of Washington are doing a little bit better. But really, in the middle of the West Coast into the Southwest, things are struggling. And a lot of that has largely just been this ridging, which has kept the snow level, that rain snow line, farther up, or just we haven't had enough precipitation. But of course, we've had some pretty active periods across the far northwest and into California over the last month. Now, as we sort of go through the forecast, as we go to the latest forecast, we're starting here again Monday evening as we go into Tuesday. Next storm system is sort of dropping. We have this amplified pattern: ridge out west, trough out east. So a lot of the storm systems are kind of dropping. Due out of the north, almost due south, a little abnormal, but that's sort of the pattern we've been seeing. As that drops in, that's going to bring some enhanced winds behind a cold front, some precipitation to work with, not a lot. It's bringing some fire weather concerns. That is, elevated winds, lower RH, and I'll talk about the fuel moisture conditions in a little bit here, but elevated winds for parts of the plains over the coming days. And then this storm system bringing in colder air, especially for the Northeast over the coming days, lake effect snow. If we go to the sort of fire danger rating or fire weather outlook, today we have elevated fire concerns, a fire risk across parts of Montana, eastern Wyoming. It's pretty far north for this time of year. Tomorrow that shifts into kind of the high plains of Colorado there, and then lower end probabilities for a combination of, warm enough temperatures, low relative humidity, and gusty winds for a lot of West Texas as we head into middle to later portions of the week. And this want to touch on the fact that when we look at our fuel moisture values, they are rather dry for a lot of the plains area, especially the western plains. Imagine the snow that happened last week across parts of Colorado and Kansas. You can kind of see that that's a reflection of these arrows indicate that the ERCs, the energy release component, sort of the dryness of the fuels, are decreasing. A lot of areas that didn't see precipitation, those are increasing. And some of these values are, in terms of where they should be, they're 90th percentile or higher. Even across West Texas, they're generally 70 to 80% of the percentile for the entire year. In general, it's pretty dry for this time of year. It's quite dry. So as we see some of those winds interacting with those dry fuels, we'll see some elevated fire weather concerns across the plains the next few days. I mentioned lake effect snow kind of kicking up. We'll see some, minor to perhaps moderate impacts in isolated areas and sort of the lake effect snow bands. It's certainly not the biggest event of the year in terms of lake effect, not the coldest air we've seen of the season. But as we step through the week, you'll see that system comes through. Second reiterating storm system comes through later in the week. That's just going to reiterate that troughing, that cold air bringing another surge. You'll notice that it does dig pretty far into the southeast, while a lot of the plains remain sort of west of that. So warm for a lot of the central, especially south central and western U.S., and then cold out east with periods of snow, some much needed rain though for the southeast as well. And really, as we go into next week, we look at the Climate Prediction Center, 6 to 10 days looking later this week and early next week. Above average temperatures out west, cooler than average temperatures expected out east. Most areas generally dry starting later this week and early next week. And as we go later to next week, remaining mostly warm out west, remaining cool and perhaps a little bit more active in terms of precipitation as you go into north portions of the central U.S. Also wanted to highlight too, Hawaii, not only Alaska getting into a more active pattern, at least from more central Alaska, but also Hawaii seeing a more active above average precipitation cycle as much needed over the coming week or so.